Hello, everybody. As promised, I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes about modules 4 and 5 and just highlight a few points that I think are really quite pertinent to understanding these two modules. So let's have a look. So in module 4, digital technology tools, one aspect of this that I always find quite challenging is the terminology that they use. So when we talk about technology, often I find that people say they don't favor technology, but what they really mean is they don't favor or like to use internet-based tools. And so there's really a confusion of terminology. This is highlighted here. If I look at this reading from Edutopia, it talks about different tools. So one tool is blogging. So blogs are a particular tool, and they give some examples of WordPress or Blogger, which are very, two of the most common blogging tools. However, we have blogs within many learning platforms. So I think the OnQ has a student blog, certainly Blackboard has student blogs, and so forth. So same kind of tool, but in a platform. And so that brings another question, which we'll come back to, is what is a platform? So then we look at Storify. That's a specific brand of tool. It's basically an online storage. And so it could be something like OneDrive or Google Drive and so forth. Now, the way they do this may be a bit different, but it's a very specific tool as opposed to a blog, which is a much more generic type of tool. Again, there's a great deal of confusion about what actual tool we're looking at and what do we mean by that. So just be very careful when you're talking about and reading some of these to distinguish between the nature of the tool, or I should say the terminology to describe the nature of the tool. Another thing that's, so when you look at online platforms, for example, some of these are perhaps a bit dated, but we have Facebook, which is more of a platform. And within Facebook, there's a variety of specific tools, including posting and messaging, which is shared by X. So when they say that these are different types of tools, there's so much overlap between these. So we have to be, again, very careful. I think if you look at activity tool, these technology tools, this pedagogy wheel, you're going to see this in module 5. So it's very useful, but it's based on what we call the SAMR model, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So don't worry too much about what's around the edge until you get to module 5. It talks about redefinition. That's part of the acronym of the SAMR model. But it is useful because it has a huge range of specific tools and what these tools are used for. So it's a very useful model from that perspective, but just ignore the outside wheel for now. So then when you get to the actual activity, which is ranking these tools, it talks about choosing one platform or tool. So again, it's very vague. One platform might have several different tools that you're using. So my advice to you is to think about, one tool, I use that in quotation marks, that you like to use. So for me, for example, I love to use discussion forums. So I would focus on how I use those discussion forums in my class, in my teaching, and so forth. And although it does talk about, how these tools support student learning, don't forget about yourself. As I always love to say, it matters who the teacher is. So you need to think about how do you use these tools to support your students, as well as how might the students use these tools. The highlight here talks about 3 examples of educators. Those could be someone that you've seen online that you don't know, or it could be people from your school. So again, a little vague, and I'll give you lots of leeway there. What I really want to know is the examples as opposed to the educators. What are they doing with these tools is what I really want to know. So that's for module 4. Let's have a look at module 5. So here when we get to module 5, there's a couple of things to look at. One is considering the role of the teacher. So here, it's quite a long video, 13 minutes, but I think it's worth reading. There's a real key takeaway from this video about what technology now allows our students to do. And so I won't tell you what that is. I'll let you discover that for yourself. So it's definitely worth watching. It's a bit dated now. I think it's from like 2006 or something, but still very relevant. And then we look at these frameworks. And so the video is quite good. And then it talks about like the SAMR model. So this pedagogy wheel that I mentioned earlier is based on this model. So this model is interesting, but a little problematic. And so if you look at all of these models, the TPAC model, the SAMR model, the TIM matrix, each of them, there's some overlapping elements, but each of them really serves a different purpose. So it's not really fair to compare them. But what you can do is see which one speaks to you the most in terms of how does it help you to identify what you're doing and, you know, of course, improve what you're doing. So if you just look quickly at the SAMR model, it talks about how are we using technology in our teaching. So we have substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition. I find these very problematic because some of the things that we see under the definition, under the element of redefinition, you know, create a narrated Google Earth guided tour. So you couldn't do that without Google Earth, but you could do a similar task with a map and you know, a Bristol board and so forth. So I'm not sure how clear or easy or how accurate some of these definitions are, but it's worth looking at. And then that might give you a bit more insight into the pedagogy wheel, which you saw in Module 4. I do like the TPAC, although it's not specifically to enhance your technology or your understanding of technology within your overall teaching. It does give you a nice way to view it in terms of technological content, pedagogic content or pedagogical knowledge and content knowledge, and how these interplay. So we have technological pedagogic knowledge, technological content knowledge, and so forth. So I won't talk too much about that. It's a very useful model, but it's as much about your pedagogy and your content as it is about your use of technology. Then you get down to the TIM. So I think the TIM is by far the most useful, and in previous cohorts of this course, a lot of the students seem to migrate to the TIM matrix. I think this one is quite useful. I won't go into it too much, but if you look at the teacher activities, it does have quite a range of description. So it's a much better description than in the SAMR model. And if you viewed this on a larger screen, this would be in a lovely matrix that you could read and highlight and interact with. So I think you might get a lot more out of looking through this one and describing what you do in terms of this framework. The IST is good, but again, I wouldn't say it's, although it's International Society for Technology, I just don't find it really focused as much on technology as, you know, it's more holistic, so it's useful from that perspective. But I think in terms of this assignment, it's useful to have something more focused on technology in our pedagogy. And then let's just have a quick look at the assignment, which is just to consider the way you do it. Select one of the 4 frameworks. You may want to look at the TIM model. Sorry, you may want to look at the TIM model. Sorry about that. And give us an overview. I think it's a useful activity for you to look through the model and any of these models and try to map out what you think you're doing. It gives you a lot of insight into, could you use some of these tools a bit better? And I think it will really highlight for you the difference between using a tool for the sake of the tool and using a tool to achieve a particular purpose. And I think it also really highlights the fact that we may want, you know, a suite of tools. And one of my points that always emerges out of this is a lot of teachers, especially teachers who are new to a lot of technology, like to use a specific tool for specific purposes. But what happens is you end up trying to use too many different tools and you lose your focus. Sorry, and you lose focus on the goals of using the tools. And this is why I'm often a proponent of using, Microsoft Office with its suite of tools, or Google Classroom, which also has a suite of tools. It may not have the best tool for what you want to do, but your students will already know how to use it, and quite importantly, you will already know how to use it, and then it becomes easier to tweak what you might actually do with that tool. So again, feel free to ask me any questions. Keep close to that 400 words. Really think carefully about what you're saying, and respond to your colleagues, and respond to questions posed to you in your post. The last couple of discussion forums have really been quite vibrant, and I see a lot of engagement in those. So I hope that's been useful to you. All right, there we go. Thank you very much.